Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired law professor returns to his family ranch, all he wants is peace. But when a powerful HOA starts sniffing around his land, trying to take what isn't theirs, he digs in. What follows is a battle of grit, law, and sheer will, a modern-day land war with no room for surrender. When I was 10 years old, I watched a group of men in suits tear down my father's barn. I remember the dry crunch of their boots over hay, the hollow sound of the foreclosure notice being nailed to the door like some twisted ceremony. That was the day my father lost half our land to a scheming homeowners association that changed zoning laws behind our backs. He never got over it. Neither did I. That's why I've spent my adult life making damn sure no one gets near what's mine. After 2 decades of teaching civil law at the university, I retired early and moved back to take care of the last 100 acres of Weston land. My parents passed years ago, but the house still stands, sturdy and sun-worn, and I turned the place into a working horse ranch. I breed quarter horses, fix my own fences, and keep my boots by the front door like a religion. Life's good when you know every inch of your land and exactly who's allowed on it, which brings me to Silver Trace Hills. They started building it 3 years ago, a glittering upscale HOA development pressed right up against the western tree line of my property. At first, I thought nothing of it. Let the city folks have their wine tastings and outdoor yoga. I didn't care what they did on their side, as long as they stayed off mine. But then came the letters. Friendly at first, typed in some overly polite font, inviting me to community coordination meetings. Then came the knocks. People in khakis and HOA polos asking if I'd consider donating a small corridor of my land to allow easier access to the nearby public trail. I explained calmly and repeatedly that my land wasn't part of any development, that it was private, and that there was no public easement running through it. They smiled, nodded, and came back again the next week. So I built a fence. A real one, 12 feet high, treated cedar, reinforced with steel posts and topped with a row of antique horseshoes. Not because I needed it, but because I knew what was coming. I'd seen this movie before. Once they start sniffing around your property lines, it's only a matter of time before someone decides your land would be more useful as theirs. I didn't make a fuss about it. Just called in a crew, marked the surveyed line, and had it built over 3 days. I even put up a custom sign that read, "Private Ranch. Trespassers will be fed to the hens." The hens, of course, are my 3 ancient blind chickens. But that's beside the point. The day after the fence went up, I caught 2 Silver Trace residents standing at the boundary, arms crossed, looking at it like I'd parked a UFO in the woods. One of them, a lean man with golf tan and that HOA arrogance in his jawline, asked if I really thought this was necessary. I looked at him. "Absolutely," I said. "You don't live here." "I do." He muttered something about community spirit and walked off. I didn't stop him, but I had the same sinking feeling I'd seen in my father's eyes when those men in suits showed up years ago. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I was saddling up Duke one morning when I noticed something off in the west pasture. Nothing obvious, just a glint of something metallic that didn't belong. It was perched high on one of the old pines that lined the boundary between my land and the HOA development. I walked over with my binoculars, figuring maybe a hunter had forgotten a tree stand. But it wasn't a stand. It was a camera. Small, camouflaged, professionally mounted, pointed straight into my property. I stared at it for a good long while. Then I went back to the barn, grabbed my ladder, and climbed up with my pocket knife. The damn thing was zip-tied into the branches like someone thought I wouldn't notice. I cut it loose, pocketed it, and spent the next half hour walking the entire tree line just to make sure there weren't any others. There weren't. Not yet. Back at the house, I plugged the camera into a spare battery rig and ran a basic scan. It was motion-activated, wireless, and registered to a private security firm out of state. Not exactly a game cam. I took photos of the device, its serial number, the mounting site, then called the county sheriff's office. Deputy Ramos showed up a couple hours later. He's a good man, used to rural complaints like fence disputes and wandering goats. This wasn't either of those. "You say it was pointing at your house?" he asked, turning the camera over in his hands. "Not the house, the trail behind the barn, but that's still 100 yards inside my property line." He nodded slowly. "Looks like pro equipment. Could have been placed by a surveyor." "Surveyors don't hide gear in trees." Ramos agreed. He took the camera into evidence and said he'd file a report for unlawful surveillance and trespassing. Might not go anywhere, he warned, unless we can tie it to someone directly. I wasn't expecting a SWAT raid, but I wanted it on record. 2 days later, a manila envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a typed letter on HOA letterhead. We regret any misunderstanding regarding environmental monitoring equipment placed near shared property lines. Silver Trace Hills HOA takes conservation seriously and maintains several observation tools to track regional wildlife and environmental impacts. Any perceived intrusion was entirely unintentional. They didn't admit it, but they sure as hell didn't deny it either. I sent a letter in return through my attorney. 1 paragraph. No confusion. Any further unauthorized surveillance or entry onto my land will be treated as criminal trespass and pursued to the fullest extent of the law. I didn't hear anything back, but I had the feeling they'd just shifted tactics. People like that don't retreat. They just change costumes. So I upgraded the fence's perimeter with trail cams of my own, thermal sensors, and a new satellite-fed alert system. Overkill? Maybe. But I'd seen what happens when you ignore a boundary once. They take it as an invitation. The land's mine. And I don't negotiate with polite trespassers. It was early. The kind of early where the light hasn't made up its mind yet and the morning air still tastes like dew and horse feed. I was on the tower, the old lookout post my father built back when wild dogs were more of a problem than developers. I come up here sometimes with my coffee and binoculars just to breathe. That's when I saw it. A white SUV creeping through the tree line on the far west edge. It wasn't coming from the main road. It was navigating a narrow fire access lane, one I kept closed off with a locked gate and a private no entry sign big enough to read from a helicopter. The SUV rolled past the sign like it was decoration, eased through the trees, and drove right onto my property. My stomach didn't drop. It boiled. The vehicle had a little magnetic sign on the side, Silver Trace Hills Community Patrol. Not a sheriff's logo, not county maintenance, just some glorified rent-a-cop with too much free time and not enough jurisdiction. I set my coffee down and pulled out the drone. It's not some off-the-shelf toy. I'd bought it after a few trespassing incidents last year, equipped with a speaker, infrared, and a camera that can read a license plate from 100 feet up. I launched it and brought it right over the SUV, hovering low and loud like a mechanical wasp. Then I keyed the mic. "You are trespassing on private property," I said, calm and clear. "Leave immediately, or law enforcement will be contacted." The driver looked up through the windshield. He was mid-40s, heavyset, bald. The way he jerked the wheel told me he wasn't expecting company. He threw the SUV into reverse, but instead of backing the way he came, he panicked, cut the wheel, and veered off the gravel maintenance path, straight into a shallow ravine I'd carved as part of the runoff system last spring. The front tires dropped, the undercarriage groaned, and the whole thing tilted forward like a sinking ship. I heard the scrape from where I stood. The patrol guy slammed it into drive, but the tires just spun mud and grass. He was stuck. I kept the drone trained on him for a solid 5 minutes while I called the sheriff's office. Didn't say much, just gave coordinates and explained a trespasser in a marked HOA vehicle had gotten himself wedged in my water channel. By the time I hiked down and got to the site, the guy was sitting in the driver's seat, arms crossed, refusing to make eye contact. I didn't speak to him, just walked around the SUV, filmed everything, noted the damage to the trench wall, and waited for Deputy Ramos. Ramos showed up, took one look at the scene, and exhaled like a man who knew his paperwork just doubled. "Jesus, Clint." "What now?" I pointed. "Came in through the fire lane, ignored signage, spun out in the ravine." I have it all on camera, including the part where I warned him to leave. The patrol guy tried to argue something about community safety, but even Ramos wasn't buying it. "You ain't got jurisdiction here," he told him flatly. "This ain't your development. This ain't even your county." The SUV had to be towed out. Took 2 hours and chewed up more of my drainage in the process. The driver didn't say another word. He just glared at me like I'd ambushed him on his morning stroll. I didn't press charges that day. I figured the embarrassment was enough, but I logged everything. Video files, GPS coordinates, timestamps. Because this wasn't just clumsy curiosity anymore. This was a test, and someone just failed it in a very public way. The letter showed up 2 days after the HOA patrolman buried his SUV in my ravine. Cream-colored envelope. Gold embossed logo at the top. The kind of stationery that screams, "We have lawyers and we're not afraid to misuse them." Inside was a full-page document titled Notice of Liability and Demand for Compensation. They really don't waste time. According to the Silver Trace Hills Homeowners Association, I was now personally and financially responsible for a series of alleged malicious actions that led to their security officer suffering both emotional trauma and vehicular damage. Their words, not mine. They claimed I had interfered with lawful community safety patrol duties. I had used aerial intimidation tactics by deploying a drone. I had failed to provide safe and accessible egress from the area, causing vehicular entrapment and mechanical harm. The cherry on top? A bold-faced demand that I pay $18,000 to cover repairs to the patrol vehicle, plus $9,000 more for stress-related damages and treatment expenses. And just when I thought it couldn't get dumber, they added a clause stating that as part of amicable resolution, I should provide limited community access to the historic woodland trail allegedly passing through my western pasture. I didn't know whether to laugh or start prepping my defense files. Instead, I walked out to the fence line, leaned against a post, and just stared at the ravine for a while. The tracks were still there, deep grooves in the wet dirt, leading straight from the fire lane into the drainage channel. His entry point was clearly marked by a no trespassing sign that had been posted there for years. This wasn't a gray area. This wasn't even beige. Back inside, I drafted a response with my attorney, L.J. Grant. She used to be a prosecutor, and every sentence she writes sounds like it belongs in a deposition. Our reply was sharp, surgical, and about 300% more grounded in reality than whatever fantasy land their letter came from. We stated in precise language that the HOA had no jurisdiction on my property, that their patrolman committed criminal trespass, that their attempt to blame me for his reckless driving bordered on defamation, that I would not be paying a cent, and any further contact of this nature would be forwarded directly to the Sheriff's Department and the County Zoning Board. LJ also added a closing line that made me grin. Should your client continue these fictitious claims, we reserve the right to pursue counteraction for property damage and harassment. The envelope went out certified the next morning. I spent the rest of the day repairing the trench wall he'd torn up and installing a new sign next to the fire lane gate. This one was bigger, made of steel, and read in red block letters, "Private Ranch, Entry Prohibited. Trespassers will be prosecuted and ridiculed." The ridiculed part felt necessary. Still, I knew better than to think a letter would end it. HOA types don't just back down, they escalate. That's their whole game. But now they'd made it official. The gloves were off. The summons arrived on a Thursday. I found it tucked between a feed catalog and an overdue electric bill, as if it were just another piece of ranch mail. Thick envelope, county court seal, official enough to raise my blood pressure a notch. Inside, Silver Trace Hills HOA versus Clinton Weston, a full civil complaint, filed in district court. They were actually suing me. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee forgotten, and read through it twice, then a third time. Their legal argument was about as elegant as a drunk bull in a china shop, but the message was clear. They were going all in. According to the suit, I had obstructed emergency access to protected public space, used surveillance technology in a threatening manner, negligently failed to provide safe passage on known shared-use land. That last one almost made me spit out my coffee. Shared-use land, as if my grandfather hadn't fenced that pasture long before their HOA was even an idea scratched on a napkin. They wanted damages, of course. $30,000 this time, plus court costs. Plus, get this, a mandatory injunction forcing me to provide limited community access via western fire lane entry for pedestrian and maintenance traffic. In other words, they were using the SUV crash as a legal excuse to open up a walking trail through my ranch. Cute. I called LJ and read the highlights to her over the phone. She didn't curse often, but when she did, it came out in Latin. Then she got to work. The next morning, we filed a formal response and countersuit. Our defense was simple. My land was private. The patrol officer had no legal right to be on it. His actions were negligent and caused property damage, but the countersuit was where we really dug in. We alleged criminal trespass, destruction of infrastructure, harassment, and malicious misuse of legal process, attempted regulatory overreach via civil coercion. We also filed a request for discovery, emails, patrol logs, security directives, internal HOA correspondence. If they wanted to make this official, we were going to play it by the book. And we had a hell of a good book. While LJ sharpened the knives, I did my part. I went down to the zoning office and pulled maps, official county-sealed surveys showing my western boundary as solid and exclusive. I found an old deed from the 1970s referencing the fire lane as private agricultural access only. Nothing in it said public trail. I made copies, lots of them. Then I took a trip to the recorder's office and started digging into Silver Trace Hills itself. Turned out this wasn't their first attempt at stretching their borders. 2 years ago, they'd tried to annex a parcel south of me, filed for boundary redefinition citing community cohesion, got shot down, quietly, buried under red tape and polite legal language. Funny thing, some of the same names on that petition were now on this lawsuit. I started keeping a file, a thick one, labeled it The Grab. Back at the ranch, I set up another set of motion cameras, doubled the drone patrols, and installed a live feed monitor right in my kitchen. If they wanted to make this a siege, I was ready. I wasn't just defending my land now, I was laying the groundwork for something bigger. They thought this was about a trail, but it wasn't. It never is. You'd be surprised how much dirt you can dig up when you know where to look, and you're too stubborn to quit. I spent the better part of a week piecing together the HOA's paper trail, armed with nothing but coffee, a thumb drive, and a deep, simmering contempt for bureaucracy. The first gold mine came from the Zoning Commission archives. I found a series of planning applications submitted by Silver Trace Hills over the past 5 years, most of them bland requests for park benches or signage, but 3 of them. Those were interesting. One request, dated 18 months ago, sought a boundary revision to incorporate a parcel of land to the southeast, land owned by an elderly man named Don Whitley. The HOA claimed it was unassigned buffer property, with no active use. Don had owned that land for 40 years. They lost the request after Don showed up to the hearing with a shotgun in his truck and a notarized deed in his hand. The transcript even showed the HOA representative calling him uncooperative. Another attempt, this one from 3 years back, targeted a narrow strip of property adjacent to the HOA's eastern edge. The owner had recently passed away, and the estate was in probate. Silver Trace Hills filed a quiet claim of interest, arguing that the land naturally integrated with the development's aesthetics. The probate judge rejected it and issued a formal reprimand to the HOA for exploiting estate confusion. Then came the kicker, a filing just under a year ago where they tried to reclassify part of the county-owned Greenbelt as common-use access trail maintained by Silver Trace Hills. The paperwork was rejected due to lack of public notice, but the language, identical to what they were now using against me. Same phrases, same font, same legal counsel. This wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. I shared everything with LJ, who looked like Christmas had come early. Pattern of behavior, she said, grinning. You can't buy better context than this. Meanwhile, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, a man's voice. Nervous, maybe late 30s. Mr. Weston, I used to work with the HOA board. I think you should know something about the patrol guy and about the cameras. Call me. I didn't recognize the voice, but I saved the message, flagged it, and called the number back. No answer, no voicemail, just silence. That same day, an envelope appeared on my gate. No postage, no address. Inside was a flash drive and a printed note. They've done this before. Here's proof. I didn't plug it into my main computer, too paranoid for that. I used an old laptop in my garage. The drive contained a folder full of PDFs, internal HOA emails, patrol reports, meeting minutes, and among them a document labeled Access Strategy, Q4. It detailed proposed methods for community corridor normalization, including incremental presence patrols, civil pressure via selective litigation, and adjusted boundary representation, maps for resident persuasion, in plain English, a blueprint for quietly stealing land. I called LJ and we scheduled an emergency hearing to submit the drive as evidence. I also gave copies to the sheriff's office just in case. That night, I sat on the porch with a bourbon in one hand and a printout in the other, watching the stars burn above my fence line. They weren't just messing with the wrong guy. They were using the same tricks on everyone. And I was about to blow the whole damn thing wide open. Courtrooms smell like dust and disappointment. I'd been in enough of them during my teaching days to know that justice isn't about drama. It's about documentation. And we had plenty of that. The morning of the hearing, LJ and I arrived early. She wore her usual all-black pantsuit and a look that could freeze mercury. I brought a stack of labeled folders, a flash drive, and the same deadpan expression I wore when grading freshman essays that tried to quote TikTok. Silver Trace's attorney showed up 15 minutes late. Expensive haircut, loud cologne, and an attitude like he expected us to fold at the first Latin phrase. Behind him sat Rebecca Hart, the HOA president herself, with 2 board members in tow. She looked like she'd just left a golf charity luncheon, all pearls and pretense. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Harriet Conroy, called things to order with a gavel strike that echoed like thunder in a barn. HOA's attorney went first, spinning a tale of community concern, alleged hostility, and my supposed obstruction of public good. He referred to their patrol officer as a civil peacekeeper and called my drainage ditch a dangerous terrain trap. I nearly choked. Then it was our turn. LJ stood up and methodically dismantled every sentence they'd said. We submitted GPS-tagged drone footage showing the patrol SUV crossing into my land, photos of the fire lane gate with signage visible and intact, audio from the drone's speaker warning him to leave, engineering reports proving the ravine had been intentionally disturbed a week before the incident by an unpermitted work crew operating under HOA request. The judge's brow climbed higher with every exhibit. Then LJ dropped the flash drive, the one from the anonymous envelope, and requested it be submitted as sealed evidence under discovery protection. The judge approved. We projected a few key slides. An HOA internal memo suggesting increased presence pressure to normalize community access. A patrol briefing instructing entry via the fire lane to assess resistance. A draft map expanding HOA boundaries into my parcel by almost 30 feet. When Rebecca saw that last one on screen, her lips went pale. Then came the kicker. We called Deputy Ramos to testify. He confirmed under oath the patrolman had no jurisdiction outside HOA property. No emergency was reported during the incident. And, most damning, that he had personally warned the HOA 2 months prior not to send security beyond their legal boundary. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Finally, Judge Conroy leaned forward and said, "I'm going to need time to review the full evidence. But I will say this. If half of what I've seen holds up, this goes far beyond a simple property dispute." That's when Rebecca tried to speak, unprompted. LJ calmly objected. Sustained. The judge recessed the hearing until the following week for formal deliberation. As we packed up, HOA's attorney avoided eye contact. Rebecca stared daggers, but her posture had wilted. I could smell panic under the perfume. We weren't just defending my land anymore. We were exposing a machine that had run unchecked for years, and now it was starting to grind to a halt. 1 week later, we came back to court, not to defend, but to strike. By then, LJ had filed our countersuit in full. We weren't just asking for dismissed charges. We were going after damages, property destruction, trespass, harassment, and the malicious abuse of legal process. Total claim, $95,000 broken down to the decimal. Every fence post, every trench repair, every hour of legal time. It was all in there. Rebecca Hart didn't look quite so composed this time. Gone were the pearls. She wore a navy blazer and no jewelry, probably trying to look reasonable. Her attorney was the same slick-haired guy, but he'd added a junior associate. The presence of backup always says one thing in court. We're nervous. Judge Conroy opened the session with a short statement. After reviewing the video evidence, documents, and prior testimony, she found the HOA's claims to be legally insufficient and materially unsubstantiated. Translation, their lawsuit was garbage. She dismissed it in full. Then she turned to our countersuit. LJ took the floor like a surgeon with a scalpel. She laid out a timeline showing the pattern of HOA land grabs over multiple years, the deliberate staging of patrol entries under false pretenses, the internal strategy documents clearly naming my property as a target corridor, and the HOA's continued engagement with my land after explicit legal notice. Then she called the county engineer to the stand. This man, who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration, calmly explained how the trench in question had been altered just days before the SUV crash. According to his inspection, the slope had been widened and the soil disturbed in a way that suggested external interference. He confirmed it had not been reported to the county, meaning it was unauthorized work. LJ followed that up by calling Deputy Ramos again. He confirmed that he'd logged HOA complaints about access denial before the incident, proving motive. Then came the HOA patrolman's own security log, obtained during discovery. It mentioned an entry assessment exercise ordered by upper board. That was game, set, and match. Rebecca's attorney tried to push back, arguing the patrolman was acting under the assumption of public access. Judge Conroy shut him down with one sentence: "Assumptions don't override private property law, counselor." Then came something I hadn't expected. The judge turned to me and asked if I intended to pursue criminal complaints separately. I said I was still evaluating that with counsel, but civilly, yes, I expected full accountability. She nodded and concluded the hearing with a ruling in our favor. HOA was ordered to pay all damages in full. Their actions were declared a pattern of unlawful encroachment, and the court issued an injunction preventing any further attempt to access or represent access to my property. Period. As we walked out, LJ whispered, "They'll think twice before filing another fake complaint against a rancher." I grinned. "They'll think twice before walking past a wooden fence. Period." But I wasn't done yet. Some battles end in court. Others keep going until everyone hears the story. The official court order arrived 3 days later. Certified mail, signature required. I stood on the porch with a pen in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other, signed the receipt, and opened the envelope like it was a trophy. Inside was the full ruling. Judgment in favor of defendant and plaintiff in counterclaim. Mr. Clinton Weston. Language like that warms a man's soul. The court awarded me $95,000 in total damages, broken down into $23,000 for structural damage to my drainage system, $12,000 for legal costs and filings, $10,000 for surveillance and property, reinforcements, and $50,000 for punitive damages related to harassment and unlawful targeting. But more importantly, it granted a permanent injunction legally forbidding Silver Trace Hills HOA from accessing, referencing, or attempting to include my property in any future plans, filings, or maps. They couldn't so much as point at my land on a brochure without risking contempt of court. The best part? The judge issued an additional protective perimeter order, meaning any HOA employee or contractor found within 50 feet of my fence line without my written consent would be subject to arrest for trespassing. Rebecca Hart didn't even bother filing an appeal. She resigned from the HOA board that same week. Word spread fast. As for the patrolman, his name was Brian Tillman. Turns out he wasn't even fully certified for the type of security work he was doing. Once the ruling came down, his employer, some shell company contracted by the HOA, revoked his ID and terminated his license. I heard through the grapevine he moved 2 counties over. Good. Let the next place learn who they're hiring. A few days later, I got a call from a local reporter. She wanted a statement about the landmark case between a private landowner and Silver Trace Hills. I kept it short. I don't need a landmark. I've got a fence. She laughed. It made the article's headline. The fallout was beautiful. The HOA's reputation took a nosedive. 3 residents filed to leave the community association entirely, citing mismanagement and aggressive overreach. A 4th put their house on the market within the month, but I wasn't vindictive, just careful. I used part of the settlement to expand my fencing another 20 feet beyond the western ridge and reinforced the fire lane gate with concrete anchors. I installed motion-activated lights and replaced my cameras with solar-powered ones that uploaded straight to the cloud. No more debates, no more misunderstandings, no more second chances. I also finally changed the sign out front. It used to say, "Private Ranch, trespassers will be prosecuted." Now it says, "Private Ranch, trespassers will be educated." In court. I figured that was fair. The sheriff called me a week after the dust settled. "Ramos," he said, "heard you shut the HOA down pretty good. You ever think about teaching again?" I laughed. "Nah, I prefer live demonstrations now." 3 weeks after the court ruling, I threw a party. Not the usual kind with plastic chairs and lukewarm coleslaw. No, this one had a name, Private Property Day. I printed flyers, sent emails, and hung a big canvas banner over the main gate that read, "Welcome to Weston Ranch. If you're from the HOA, turn around." I invited the neighbors from 3 miles in every direction, except, of course, the Silver Trace crowd. Somehow, none of them RSVP'd. We set up hay bales around the fire pit, fired up the smoker, and served enough brisket and pulled pork to make half the county drowsy. My buddy Joe brought his homemade apple pie moonshine and a guitar. By dusk, we had a full-on bluegrass jam going. Horses grazed behind the new steel fencing, kids chased each other across the pasture, and folks stood around drinking beer and talking about land, boundaries, and what it meant to actually own something. At one point, a retired surveyor gave an impromptu workshop under the oaks titled, "How to Read Your Deed Before Someone Else Does." We turned the barn into an open exhibit space with documents from my case pinned to corkboards, highlighted maps, photos, and screenshots from court transcripts. I hung a poster over it all, "Know your rights or lose them." I even brought out the drone, gave live demos on how to use aerial footage to document trespassing, which made the local kids lose their minds. They lined up to watch it zip through the trees and drop little toy eviction notices into a plastic tub. The real surprise was the turnout. Over 100 people came. Farmers, ranchers, retirees, even a young couple who just bought a cabin up the ridge. Turns out, a lot of folks had their own HOA horror stories. Most had never taken them to court. Some didn't even know they could. By the time the stars came out, I realized this wasn't just about celebration, it was education. That night, I uploaded a 10-minute video to my YouTube channel titled, "How to Defend Your Land, the HOA Tried and Failed." It featured drone footage, excerpts from my trial, and a calm breakdown of every step I took, from installing cameras to filing the countersuit. Within 3 days, the video hit 50,000 views. By the end of the month, it was shared by 3 landowner advocacy groups and made it onto a segment of local news titled "The Rancher Who Fought Back." I wasn't interested in fame. Hell, I didn't even like people knowing where I lived. But if one landowner somewhere decided to say no because of what I shared, then it was worth it. I closed the night sitting on my porch with Duke snoozing beside me, watching the moon rise over my fence line. No lights in the Silver Trace development, just dark rooftops and silence. I imagined Rebecca Hart somewhere, staring at a blank HOA agenda with no more power to abuse and no more neighbors to bully. The wind rustled through the trees like it was whispering, "Well done." I didn't answer. I just leaned back, let the chair creak, and smiled. My land, my rules. And now everybody knew it.